All right, welcome back. We are COMP301. That is Linux operating systems in the summer 2020 semester at Centennial. And it's week 6, part 2 of our broadcast. And we're talking about setting up a web server with Linux using Nginx instead of using Apache. Right. So first of all, let's talk about what this stuff is that I'm talking to you about, and so you can use it. So, by the way, as before, our video is up on eCentennial, so you can watch it live here on YouTube. It'll be slightly behind what I'm talking about here, but it shouldn't be an issue. I've modified my setup a little bit, which might make my picture not as clear on the YouTube video, but that's only because it's only temporary as I move into a new kind of setup in this office that I set up. So you might see some slight changes. Do apologize for that. Hopefully you hear me just as good as you've done before. Alright, so what is Apache? So if I look at Apache web server, what is that? It's kind of like the de facto standard, I would say, for web tools. It's an open source project that pretty much has been around since, as far as I can remember, going back. Right? I'm talking about like way back. It says 1996 here. But I mean, I remember early versions of something like Apache, in the 90s, early 90s, right? So that's when, I remember using it, and it was the de facto standard because it supported PHP, which is a back-end web server language that we would use, for interactivity with the servers. So, for example, if I want to do something like mail, or if I wanted something like form processing or something like that, then the de facto go-to was Apache, right? I used Apache as a backend. This is part of the solution stack, right? Apache, and then a lot of times what we used MySQL, right? Again, it's the I would say the open source version, if you will, of SQL Server, right? So MySQL, and again, it says 25th anniversary. It's been around for a long time. And Apache and MySQL as a database, as a backend database, was used primarily a lot of times for serving up all kinds of applications, including WordPress. WordPress was a very popular solution back then. So you had this idea of an AMP stack: Apache, MySQL, and then of course PHP. Right. So those are the kind of the solution stack that existed before. And, I think that was kind of like the standard, right? So there's PHP. PHP 8 is out now, which is interesting that's the case. So, that's how it was before. And I think for the most part, we still have about 80% penetration of an Apache server on the back end, MySQL, and PHP. So that was good. Right, but what's happening is as we've moved forward in Web 3.0, we're moving away from an AMP stack. And by the way, AMP, Apache, MySQL, PHP, has different versions. LAMP is Linux. MAMP is Mac. WAMP is Windows. Right, different versions of the solution stack, but they have limitations. And one of the limitations that PHP had was first of all, it was very well known, and there's a lot of security loopholes, if you will, or we could definitely kind of penetrate PHP very, very easily, especially with a lot of people who set up PHP servers, as an example, on the back end, don't understand how to secure it. So there are exploits that are very well known, and we can kind of penetrate PHP servers fairly good. Now they've improved very much over the last little while. It's not like PHP stopped development. As you can see, PHP 8 alpha is out. This is good. This is good news. Have to keep moving. One of the other issues with PHP that you're going to notice if you ever learn PHP here at the college is the idea that it is very loosely typed. So again, the PHP language. There are kind of an object-oriented wrapper you can put around the language to make it better, called Laravel, right? So that's one of them. There's other frameworks that you can use. And I think Laravel is a great way of rejuvenating PHP and making it kind of more modern, and so we can use it today. And again, it creates almost like this object-oriented framework that we wrap around PHP. That makes it more robust, and it has its own package manager built in and a bunch of other stuff. It's amazing. Kind of a forward-facing, back-end framework that is slowly, taking PHP by storm, if you will. And over the last several years, I would say 5 years at least, it's been more and more popular. But the new kid on the block is not PHP. It's not MySQL and this whole stack. It's not Apache, but rather the mean stack. So this has kind of been in play for about 5 years too, right? And the mean stack has a bunch of other technologies, and some of them that you're going to hear about throughout your studies here at Centennial are, instead of Apache on the back end, what you're going to have instead is a Node.js server on the back end. So Node would be on your back end. We've already installed Node, right? And we need something to drive that. So as a back end, we'd use Nginx. Let me just show you what Nginx is. So Nginx is another type of platform, nginx.com. And it is definitely a replacement for Apache. Right, and the great thing about that is it supports things like microservices, more modern APIs, and it supports things like Node.js. Out of the box, Apache does not support Node.js. It doesn't, right? Which is a negative thing. So if I want to run everything JavaScript, so JavaScript on the back end, instead of MySQL, I can use something called MongoDB. So if I go to mongodb.org, that's kind of our database. Again, it's a NoSQL database. So as opposed to having a SQL database with structured query language, we have something that's NoSQL that's using JavaScript now. So JavaScript at the database, and then JavaScript in the middle using something called Express.js, right? So there's your middleware. So you've got your middleware, Express.js, you've got your server, Node.js, and you have your database, MongoDB. And then as a front end, instead of using something like a PHP framework like Laravel, we have several options. So mean stack, Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. Angular is one of the front end frameworks that we can use. Angular.io, I would say, is it's a framework that's been developed by both Google and Microsoft. Microsoft using things like TypeScript as a back-end language, as well as or front-end language, as well as Angular.js, which is a component-based framework that makes, that can be used to create web applications. Awesome. And version 9 is out now, and I think it's a fantastic framework. They've really developed it over the last several years, so really good. And maybe even more popular than Angular, and maybe a little easier to learn, is something called React.js, right? So React is more of injection based. So it's like instead of being a framework, it's more like a library. So I kind of tapped the library, which is React. It's less opinionated than Angular. Angular, you have to do things in a specific way. And then what happens is we can use React, again, a JavaScript interface, if you will, or an API that gives us this really cool interactivity with JavaScript everywhere. I would say Angular is popular, but React is even more so. And the last one, there's a couple more, but probably another one that's really popular is something called Vue.js. So those are the kind of the more popular ones that are out there. Again, these are all JavaScript based frameworks and libraries. And they replace things like jQuery and some of that old stuff that existed before. So really good stuff, and it gives you this whole JavaScript ecosystem, as opposed to using things like PHP. We're also going to talk in the second half of semester us using something called Python. So if I go to Python, Python is very popular. It's one of the most popular languages in the world right now, and it's because Python is, again, free, open source. It's in modern development. It's supported by the community. It's used for data science. It's used for games. It's used for websites. You can use Python with something called Django. So, let's just say Django. And it's using Python, so Django. And Django is a back-end server again. So you can have another framework using Python, right? So again, there's different kinds of solution stacks, and these are different ones that we've talked about right now. It's almost like you have a web framework that uses Python, so you use the Python language, as opposed to, PHP, or as opposed to JavaScript on the back end, right? So a lot of other options, and Django is pretty popular, not as popular as PHP by far, and definitely not as popular as Node.js nowadays, but it's out there, and there's a lot of quite a few sites that use Python Django specifically on the back end. There's also Java, there's a bunch of other things, okay, but we're going to stick to these ones. So really what I want to do today is explore, can we set up or modify the built-in server that we have that is built into Linux, which is Apache by default. Apache is built in. It's something that you can access right away. We can remember we talked about this week is all administrative stuff. We've learned about FTP, how to set up an FTP site, which is really quickly, and not a lot of issues with it. Although we did have some funky stuff near the end of session last day, but more or less, I think it's a pretty straightforward install. It doesn't take a lot to get going, and you're going to see that Apache, in the same vein, is something that is pretty straightforward to install and so on. So let's get to it. So I'm just going to close all this stuff down. But I wanted to bring this to you because, I think this is going to tie in nicely, or dovetail, if you will, to the stuff that you've been learning on the JavaScript side, as well as COMP301 this semester, and a bunch of other programming things that you've been learning as you go towards kind of more further into your studies and into third semester and fourth semester and so on. You're going to see that we're going to have more JavaScript, more and more JavaScript, especially in next semester with COMP301. So I have two. Going back to my virtual machine, I have two little VMs that we've made. One of them is this older version that I was using last day, and this one that I've been working on with you guys. This has got Nginx installed, and I wanted to kind of install Nginx on this one, but to make our lives a little easier, I'm just going to reconfigure my settings a bit just to show you what I've done. One thing I've done is, from a system memory perspective, I have 32 gigs on my machine, so I can allocate more RAM. In fact, I can probably draw this up to the middle, which is 16,384 megabytes. So that's 16 gigs I'm going to give this server. Again, this is just to make our lives easier and faster. Instead of having only one CPU, my system has it's a 6-core system, which means I have 12 threads built in my system, so I can allocate more CPU power to run a VM. And this is, by the way, the same as if you run things online. You can buy more power from a CPU perspective if you buy a VM online, like something like through DigitalOcean or something like that. And of course, it's going to cost you more money because we're allocating more resources. So let's just bump this up as an example. We're going to bump this up to 3 cores. Again, three processors, which is like 3 threads equivalent. If I wanted to go all the way, I can go all the way to here, which would be 6 processors, right, which is like 3 cores and 6 threads. All right, so that's kind of how it is. I have 12 threads in my on my processor, so I can allocate this much if I want. Memory wise, we want to shoot up out of the 64 megabyte range all the way to 128 megs. We want to kind of push this as far as we can because it'll make our experience better. So again, we're talking about optimization here in the VM. And the rest I would probably leave as is. I'm not going to touch everything. So now that we've reconfigured our little server, it's on par with what we have over here as an example. So this is what we have. One thing also to note is we have to make sure that, see if the network is also set up properly. One more thing I want to check on this server here is that it's bridged. Okay, I definitely don't want to set up an adapter that is NAT. so that I get the right host IP address. Okay, so that's kind of the one thing I want to do. Let's launch this one. Now again, this is another one. This is a secondary one because I've already done work on my primary. Okay, but it'll be very similar. Okay, so I'm bringing this up now. It's going to take a bit of time, as normal. And you guys should be on par with the stuff that I've done already. So to me, lots and lots of learnings this semester on the Linux side. I think you guys have the basis after this to really understand how to run a little server or even a workstation on your own. I think there's a lot of utility from the stuff that we've gone through, and that's why it's so important. Once you learn this stuff about Linux, then you hit something like Windows, and you realize, wouldn't it be nice if we had those Linux commands on the Windows command prompt? It would be nice, right? And so they have done something like that with PowerShell. Logging in, and just like before, what I'd like to try and do here is I want to go to my terminal, and I want to explore some stuff. So first of all, without touching anything, and if I just say if config, let's do this together. Again, what if config will do, remember, almost from the first day, is give us our IP address for the server. So this is what our IP address is, 192.168.2.91. I haven't done any configuration, and if you try doing what I'm doing right now, hopefully you'll get the same results. I'm just going to kick off a new browser window, which I'm going to bring over here. Okay, and let's just make this so you can see it side by side. I'm just going to use my Windows key and left arrow to bring it to the right. And I'm going to use my Windows key and right arrow to bring my virtual machine to the right. This to the left, and this to the right, so you can see both side by side, right? And here, I'm just going to put in the IP address, 192.168.2.91. And if I go there, and if it was active, then my expectation is that I would get some kind of response. Okay. But remember what we did last time. We need to use the control service on this side here, right? What we want to do in the control service and the firewall is create a firewall exception so that we can tunnel through from an external machine all the way through into the the firewall that lies or the port that we want to access, which is port 80 by default. So web servers, they usually sit at port 80. So if I access port 80 here, if I don't put an actual port in here, we should be able to automatically access port 80 over here. Okay. But again, what we need to do is we need to go to that firewall setup, and what we want to do is we want to use system control to do a couple things. We want to enable HTTP, right? So first of all, let's see, do we even have HTTP in here? HTTPD is the service for HTTP. Remember, system control, right? So if I go sudo system control, and I want to go status, and then HTTPD, right? So if I did that, put in my password, it should give me, do I have anything? But notice it says it's inactive, dead. All right, so that is what you might see as well. We need to enable it, right? So if I'm going to make this active, and this is just out of the box, okay? And look, notice what it says. It says Apache HTTP server. That's what we're accessing from the get-go. So by default, it's been preloaded with your Linux installation, right? Apache has been there, right? So what we want to do is we want to enable it. So just like before, what we want to do is we want to say system control. Let's use sudo again. Sudo system control enable HTTPD. Okay. And then notice we create a symlink, right? And if I check the status again by going up to here, we can see now it says again HTTPD is loaded but inactive. Okay. So it's important to understand this because even though we created a symlink, right, and everything else, we want to restart the server. Okay, or start. So one is we enable it, and once we enable it, that's nice. But what we also want to do is we want to bring the server back up, or bring it up in the first place, so to speak, right? And in order for us to do this, we want to restart that server. So again, we can say something like sudo. By the way, if I go man system control again, and that's what this is, system control. So almost like running a service. So this is what this is, the system service or system daemon. That's what it is, right? Running in the background. We can definitely look at different subcommands, right, that do different things. So you can see as we scroll, stop, start, right, would be something we want to use. Reload, right? So you want to reload something. Restart, and so on. So if I want to start the service, right, then let's just try start. So I'm going to go here to sudo system control, and we'll say start HTTP down. If everything goes well, then it should say nothing like this. And if I go back up to the status, we should see it's being green now. Okay, so now no changes to the firewall. All I've done is run HTTP, but notice it says HTTPD could not reliably determine, and I wonder if it's going to give us the thing. But more or less what it's trying to do is determine if it has access, right? So even if I refresh now, unless I open the firewall as an example, then even though the service is running here, so let's say, for example, I run the service locally, and I run things with our my command. So let's say I'll bring up my command, right, and I want to bring up my little web browser here locally in Linux. And the way to test this, of course, would just to be put in something like localhost. If I just type in localhost and press enter, notice it's working now. The Fedora web server test page, it's working, and it says for systems using Apache, we can configure things here, etc httpd httpd confd, and then welcome.conf. This welcome.conf tells us where the configuration folder is. It says you may now add content to the directory var www.html. var www.html. Note that until you do so, people visiting your website will see this page, right, and not that page. So we can do this. We'll do this before we go to Nginx. We'll do this first, okay? So and then it says for systems using Nginx, you should now put your content in a location of your choice and edit the root configuration directive in the Nginx configuration file, blah, blah, blah. We don't have Nginx built in, so we're going to go install it manually, okay? But notice from the outside, still no access. And the reason for this is because of our firewall, right? We have to make a firewall exception, or else it's not going to happen. We won't have access to to configure HTTPD as before, right? So again, remember the firewall command. So let's see if you guys remember from last day, right? I'm just going to drag this down here. It says we know it's running locally. What is the command? Can I increase the font size by 2? Are you talking about here, Tiago, or on the Windows side? I'm not sure which one you have a problem with. Terminal, this one. Okay. Is it control? I think. Hold on a second here. Just a moment. I want to make sure that, yeah, capture. Thank you. Of course, mine is just not doing so. Let's see if I can just do it here in my workspace right here. Set title, advanced. I'm going to go to preferences. Hopefully that'll change the size right there. Dark themes, global, where the hell is it? Shortcuts. Zoom in, Control++, there we go. Okay, Control++. Of course, mine is just not going to work because, you know, I want to show you that it's going to work, but you see, it's not doing what I want it to do. Okay, I'm not going to bother. Sorry, Tiago. I'm trying my best here. I'm trying my best, and it's just not going to happen. Let's see if I can just do one of these. How about that? And do it this way. I was hoping to do it with the with command line, but you know, whatever. Let's do it this way and do it that way. Let's try that again. Hopefully that is going to be wonderfully visible by you. And hopefully it's not going to take up too much of my space. There we go. All right. Okay, so yeah, so that hopefully will be a little bit more clear on what I'm doing. So yeah, we need to have this firewall command. So if you notice, if I go man firewall command, you can see firewall command like before, right? What we want to do is we want to add an exception to the firewall and then reload it, right? We want to make it permanent, right? That's what we definitely want to do. And what we can do is if you go through it, permanent, so definitely we want to use this flag, the permanent flag. When we're done, we want to make a permanent change, right? And I'm just reviewing what we did last time. So if you go through and just use man, to me, the man command is probably like, I use it all the time for whatever. Like there's just so many things. So if I want to add a port or a service as an example, right? I know I'm getting like slammed here. So this is a port forward. If I want to add a forward port, I can port forward, which is something that we may want to do later on. We'll see how that goes. But you can see that there are many commands here when it comes to all the things that we can do, you know, as an example, in our firewall, right? So at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at. Okay, we have to open up port 80, right? And the way to do that is we want to add port, right? As an example, there's a couple ways to do that. One of them is add port 80, right? And then -- permanent, which is what we want to try and do. Okay, so let's try this. So again, it's filtered. By default, it's turned off. So what I want to do is I want to make it in the public zone, right? So let's go there and try that out. So we'll say sudo firewall command, and then we'll say zone public, right? And then add port. Sorry, it's crossing lines. I'm a little bit zoomed in. And then 80, and then TCP, and then -- permanent. Okay, if I spelled everything properly. Maybe I did. And if everything goes well, and things did not, yeah, of course, zone public should be zone equal to public. I'll be okay. Zone equal to public. I'm sorry, guys, old school stuff. So now I've made a kind of a port. I've opened up a port, and maybe, hopefully, right now, what we might get is this idea for us to see our site, right, from the outside. Now notice that we don't have anything. One thing is that we're trying to access 192.168.2.91, and if I did like port 80, port 80 by default is the default port. There is no other default port than port 80. So that is, you can see still that what we have to do now is the next part, which is now that we've opened it, we have to reload it. So let's try that next. So we're going to say sudo firewall command, and we're going to say -- reload. Why? Because we've made changes to the firewall. First we make the change, then we reload the firewall, and now maybe we're going to have better access, maybe. And again, we have to check to see if the firewall is actually something that we're having a problem with, as an example, or if it's something else. So again, you see the steps we're taking. Okay. So it's important to kind of see that, you know, that we're doing things in the right order. Okay. The next thing is to look at that site that we were told about. So remember, we said that. Oops. We said that. Let's bring back that thing here. Where is that? Where's my... There it is. But where is my... Of course, it's going to bring it on the wrong screen. Yes. We said that this isn't available, but what about internally? Internally, when we went to the, our website internally, right? And then we went to localhost. Again, if I just type in localhost like this, it tells us where to look. It's etc httpd confd welcome, and we want to put our stuff in /var www html. Cool. All right. So these are steering directions for us. Again, whenever I look at steering directions like this, then it's good, right? So the server gives us some instructions on what to do. So /var. So if I go cd/var, and then you can see that in here, if I go www and then HTML, we got nothing. So of course, there's nothing to show because nothing is there, right? So assuming that everything goes well, everything is going well, well, there's nothing in here. Okay, but there is a problem. And you can see that right now it's owned by root, right? So if I wanted to make a website, what a pain in the ass that would be to make my own website in here with an index.html. If I said like touch, index.html, remember what we would get is this cannot touch index.html, permission denied. And then imagine if I had to do sudo every single time we added a website. Not good. So a couple things we could do is we could change the owner. So one thing we talked about was change mode, right? Change mode is it's still okay, but the other one we haven't talked about is chown, change owner, right? Chown. And if I look at man, change owner, right? Then you can see it says change the file owner and group, right? And it gives us some examples, right? So it says, okay, I want to change the owner, as an example, from the current owner, to, the new owner, all right? So I want to change the owner, right? So here's an example. It says change the owner of /u to root, right? And what do I want to change? I want to change everything recursively also. I don't want to just change the owner to me, to the current user, but also, so when I log in here, I don't have to have issues setting up my websites, right? Because I definitely want to do this, but I want to change it recursively, right? So that way I use the -r option, right? Because if I don't change the owner recursively, that means if I add new stuff, then the next site and the next site, they're all going to be owned by a root as well. Root is the root user, the super user, right? And this is the options, how it goes. So it says, so change owner, options, and then whoever the owner is, right, or group, and whatever the file is. So it'll be change owner -r, capital R, and whatever the group is going to be, to Tom, let's say, right? To Tom, and to make sure that I have, all the correct, stuff, as an example. Okay, so let me show you how this works. All the correct permissions. All right, so again, I'm here. I will say something like, you can do it from anywhere, by the way. I could say like sudo change owner, right? And then who, so let's say it's me, right? And then /var /www. And if I remember, I want to also do -r before I forget, -r. So Tom /var /www/html. Okay, cool. And if I did a ls-al now, you should see that my current owner right now is Tom. So for the dot, for the current folder, that's what dot means, current folder, right? I am the owner, right? So that's pretty cool. So now I should be able to do touch and then index.html. Should be able to do that, see? there's index.html. Then I can go code index.html. Let's put that up in a Visual Studio Code here. And I'm just going to add in, and sorry Tiago, I know that it's not the biggest version, but I'm going to put in here, without modifying the preferences, HTML5, so colon. So I'm going to use Emmet, which is built into VS Code, and then I'm just going to make a little page. So this is going to say, instead of document, it's going to say hello world. So now we know we have something. So we can troubleshoot these things to make sure that this page is going to work, right? I want to give it an h1 tag, and inside the h1 tag I also want to say hello world. Let's just do the same thing on the tab. And if I save this now, we have an index.html page. Even though it's really ugly, if we go there like it says, then this should have relatively no issues, right? However, you can see it's still there is a bit of a problem. We're being blocked is what's happening. Okay. So that's the first thing. So first thing is we did our due diligence, right? So we got Visual Studio Code to make a page. We can do a cat index.html. We know that page is there now. We've tried. We've configured it the way we said we're going to do. And then if I go here, if I refresh, it should just say hello world. So this locally, we can see locally that it's working great, right? But it's not really escaping from here out to the rest of the world. So that's something that we have to do. Okay. And again, I'm pointing this out because this is before we even get into the whole how to install Nginx and all that kind of stuff, because we can do, you and I can want to do whatever we want to do, but at the end of the day, we have to have access to the firewall, right? Because the firewall is the big stopper, if you will. That's the thing that stops us from actually accessing any of this stuff and having access to this stuff. And we can also look at the configuration file that's inside of etc. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to go up one step. Here's HTML. Up another step. You can see that here we're in the var folder, right? Here we're in the, if I go pwd, let's go to etc. Here's etc. This is where it's being installed, right? And in the etc folder is where we're actually going to install Apache as well. All right, so this is where Apache's been installed, right? So remember that if you scroll up, then all of your installations and configuration files should be here, okay, by default. So again, configuration for Apache is here. So let's make sure I got this right. I'm talking Apache first because I want to make sure that that we're good to go, because I think it's important for us to to kind of go through this. So again, if we scroll down, here's HTTPD. That's the service we're using, right? So we can go to cd HTTPD, and what we want to look at is HTTPD, conf, right? Or that's the configuration file. So inside HTTPD, there is a confd, right? This one. We can do some showing of what that is. Conf.d, right? That's a directory. And there's our welcome .conf configuration file. So if I do a cat welcome.conf, then you can see now we get into this idea of this is what a configuration file, I'm sorry I'm so big here, a configuration file might look like that's inside of our Apache server. So it looks like this. We have a location, it's doing a regular expression, and what it's doing is when we match a regular expression, we're able to to kind of share. So you can see here the directory user share HTTP no index. It says allow override none, require all granted. Okay, so these are some configuration kind of files for this. It also shows us where we have no index. What does that look like? Index.html. So when we don't have an index file, go into, it says user or USR share HTTPD no index, and look at that index.html file. That is where we should be looking. So let's go there. So we'll say cd/USR share HTTPD, right, no index. And let's take a look of what that looks. This is where we are right now, right? And let's take a look at that file, cat index.html. You can see that that is a much more, a much larger file, and that is the file that happens when we don't have an index.html file stashed away somewhere else. So it says, if you're using, this is the part, if you're using Apache, you may now add content to this. And then, however, if you look at etc http confd/welcome.conf, this is where the configuration file is, which is where we're at right now. Okay, so locally, we've kind of done our due diligence. That's where this is. Confd, blah blah. But again, and so we've run this, and we can see locally we have a local web. So if we're going to do a kind of a local web server or an intranet instead of an extranet, like a website as an example, then we would do it in here. Okay. So that's the kind of the first part. But we need a firewall exception for this that is going to work better than the one we have, because that is not going to work for us. Okay, so for HTTPD, I'm just making sure this is cool before I put this up for you guys on Fedora, because the commands are slightly different across different platforms. I want to make sure I give you the right command, because that would be a bad thing if I'm giving you the wrong command. And I think I've done it correctly, but I want to make sure that I want to open up not just a port, but a service. And I think what I have to do is open up HTTPD, if I'm not wrong, an HTTP port. Because otherwise what will happen is it's not just adding the port, but also the service as a add service like HTTP as an example. So let's try that. So I want to add service. So I think it's firewall. I'm just going to confirm this, and then add service HTTP is what I want. Just going to make sure that that is correct, because I think that's what it is for me. Permanent, which is what the site told me last time. Anyway, I don't think I need to do it that way. Add service HTTP. Okay, let's try that. So I'll do the same thing with the service. So let's clear, and I think it's this. It's sudo firewall. If you can't do this, then the other thing won't work. Firewall command, and then it's again zone. Zone is equal to public, and then it's -- add service this time, and that's equal to HTTP -- permanent. And now we have to reload the server after we've done that, because again, we don't want to. It won't work unless we reload it, right? So that is an important piece. So what we can, once we've done that, we want to do the other command, which is sudo firewall command, and then -- reload. Okay, so success, right? So now we've opened up the port as well as the service. Let's see if that treats us any differently. It looks like it's not treating us any differently. And it also might be because of the way it's shuffling through. It might be just bouncing from this part, right? So create my own zones. Why is it being blocked? Why is it being blocked? Let us take a look at those zones. I want to see what they look at. So when for firewall, you can go sudo firewall command. I want to see the zones. Oops. I want to get zones. Fedora server, Fedora workstation, block, DMZ, drop, external, home, internal, libvirt, M shared, and public, trusted, and work. So those are the ones. So what I want to do is so I want to add public as a zone, as an example, that because I have public web? I don't think I have something like that. I have public, and I have our DMZ, right? So DMZ is, by the way, it's a shortcut. It's a short form of demilitarized zone. You should know this if you have your own firewall at home. So that's kind of the way we do it, right? So just going to make sure that I don't want to start my network again. So get, okay, so that is get zone. Let's get active on sudo firewall get active zones. So no active zones. Okay. And let's do that again. So firewall command. I have to do sudo again. Sudo firewall. Oops. Command. I'm just doing troubleshooting here, guys, because it's something dumb. Zone is equal to public, and we want to list services, so we can see what it is. There we have HTTP, MDNS, and SSH. Okay, so that makes sense. So that means if I have SSH access, that I should be able to go through this, and I should be able to do SSH 192.168.2.91, and I should be able to access that. Connection refused, port 22. So that gives me a hint that that is an issue. So what if we had the same problem as last time, which means that in my my software configuration, sorry, I meant to go into settings. If we were to do sharing, which is file sharing for the local domain, so not screen sharing but remote login, if we turn that on as an example, and it's going to ask me to log in, I think this is just going to do that configuration to allow me to do the same command through Windows and have access. Yes. Right? And that's good. So that's kind of the one thing I was hoping. I was hoping that we would have, at least we get access, because we're being blocked here and there, and that's kind of something that we want to open up. Okay, because I mean, again, so I know I wanted to also check that this IP address is correct, and it looks like it is, because we're able to access our server no problem, right? Otherwise, then I wouldn't be able to do it, right? So I'm going to set the default zone to public. Let's see if how that works. So again, what you can do with the firewall, you can say sudo firewall command, and then we can say set default. That's another parameter. Set default zone, and that's equal to public. And then success. We have to reload the server, because now once we've done these changes, one thing we definitely need to do is reload again, because every time we do this kind of stuff, we make changes, we want to reload. Okay, so now we know that the default zone is public, and hello. Okay, so that should do everything. Okay, so steps. What did we do? How did we fix it? I know it's recorded, but let's go through it one more time. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, just so that way we can all see it a little bigger. Sorry, Tiago. But if you look through, right, what we've done is we've added a again, you can scroll up and see all the different commands. There's a lot, right? But some of the first commands we did, and this is why one thing I love about Linux as well, you can always go up. We went into the firewall command, the first thing we did, right? And we said, hey, like, you know what? I want to add port 80, right? Because without port 80, I don't have access to, to the port itself. That's the one thing I wanted to do. Then I reloaded the firewall. I also I put inside of our I had to change our owner for /var /http www http. I wanted to change that so that way we own that folder. So that way I can add in websites anytime I want. Okay. Which is a good thing. So I mean, look at this. I mean, I'm literally serving my website here on Windows from my Linux server, and this is using Apache. So we've kind of met criteria. If I want to have an old school server, PHP, by the way, I can make PHP run. I haven't set up PHP yet because there's no PHP, just Apache right now. But I could set it up so that I could set up a PHP server, no problem, on the Apache side, right? Now with Apache to make our AMP stack, right? And then MySQL server I can install, and then we're ready to go. So these are all good things. So so we've kind of done the web server part. The web server part is working. However, so we did the change owner. We changed owner to me, right, for this particular folder, and just to review. We also added the recursive option, and the reason why is if I add any folders in or anything else inside of this folder in the future, I also want to own it. If I didn't put this recursive switch in, this option, then future folders might be owned by somebody else, like by the root, which would be me having to go in there and getting permissions, which would cause all kinds of headaches later. So that's the first part. And then we did some troubleshooting, and we got to the point where, with some troubleshooting, I'm just going to go back down. I went to the configuration, I looked at the welcome, I went to no index. I showed you guys that is where our default index.html page is. Then as long as we have some kind of we put something in var / in the right folder, we're good to go. This is what we did here. Okay, so that's what we did. We were able to check it locally, but remotely it wasn't being accessed, so we added a service, HTTP, to the firewall inside the public zone. Okay, that's what we did. And then we looked at zones. We kind of did a zone list, and we figured that one of the things that I probably had forgotten was to make the default zone public, which is what is going to access for us for SSH and for other things. And once I have done this, then really at the end of the day we reloaded the firewall and we're good to go. Okay, so this is where we are right now. Just wanted to bring everyone to task, or everyone up to speed when it comes to this stuff. So anything I add now into that location, so if I go back up one, and again, you can see that if I'm in /var, right, and if I go to www, that's the default place for any installation, HTML. You see that's where my index.html is, and I can make a whole site that's non-responsive, pretty much, or non-adaptive, and with no PHP, nothing on the back end. So there's right now we don't have a back end server. It's just a simple website that you can serve right off your home server right here. Okay, that's what we've done. But we want to add new functionality. We want to add Nginx, and so this is where we come to the next part of our journey. We want to shut down Apache. We're going to say goodbye, Apache. Thank you so much for being of service. But now what we want to do is we want to install Nginx, right? And in order for us to do that, we have to download components, so that we know we've got everything we need. So let's do that now. So again, we're going to go back to our root. So back to root. Just to do it there. We'll do it there. Doesn't matter where, right? We'll use the sudo command, and what we want to use is we want to use the DNF package manager, right, to grab and install Nginx. Okay, so that's something that we want to do. So we're going to say, DNF install Nginx. Nginx is spelled NG, right, INX, Nginx. So that's what we want. But we want sudo DNF install, I'll be okay. Nginx, that's what you want. And it's going to go out to the web, and if we are successful, it's going to grab Nginx from its default depot or distribution. We could have put a -y option in here, so we don't have to kind of respond to this. But let's just put a y now. It's going to go grab these files, and this is the preferred way of doing it. We grab Nginx. That's fantastic. And now that we've downloaded it, what we need to do is we need to get rid of Apache, right? So now that we've got Nginx, it's not going to work, right? We need to make Nginx our default. That's what we need to do, and not Apache. Okay, so that's where the next phase of how we're going to do things are. All right, so let's do the next part. So we want to say goodbye to Apache, and we want to say hello Nginx, right? And so this is where we have more advanced kind of configuration. So we want to stop the HTTP service. Let's do that now. So we'll say, by the way, you can also use service. So if I go sudo service instead of system control, right? And I want to say, there's another way to do it, HTTPD stop, right? This is going to stop the service. So now if I go back out to here, to my page, it should bounce. Notice it's bouncing now, right? Because I stopped the service. Now if I restart the service, if I just go back here and say start, right? I'm just showing you, bam, we're back up, right? So this is the thing between the Linux server and our server right here. This is our little Windows machine here. Okay, so let's stop the service again. So we want to stop the service because we can't make changes to the service unless it's stopped, right? So that's the first thing. So now we stopped, and if I refresh, it should stop. It shouldn't work anymore. Yeah. Number one. Now we want to disable HTTPD. That's what we want to do, and we want to remove it, right? So it doesn't start again. And the way to do that is to say again system control. So sudo. Let's do a clear. Sudo systemctl system control, right? And we want to disable HTTPD. Removed. So we remove that from the service altogether. All right. And if we were to check this, sudo system ctl and then status HTTPD, you're going to see that it says it's loaded, right? But it's inactive dead. This is where we started with inactive dead. That means that there's nothing, the service isn't running in the background whatsoever. This is what we want. We want to get to this point. Okay. All right. So now that we've disabled the service, right? What we want to do is we can always go back if we're unhappy with Nginx. We can always just enable it. We're not removing any files or anything like that. Okay. So there's nothing that's going to be removed, right? It's just a matter of running Nginx now instead. All right. So now that we have it, if I say something like system ctl, right? So again, and I want to go status Nginx, right? Then it says Nginx, it says service loaded inactive dead, right? So notice if we did this and there wasn't any Nginx, it would be like, I don't know what that command is. Here we're not getting that error. We're saying the Nginx HTTP and reverse proxy server, right, is loaded, but it's inactive. So now what we need to do is we need to enable it, just like we did with our standard server. So we'll do that. So we'll say system control, we'll enable, as an example, Nginx. And it's asking me for a password here. Okay, that's interesting. Sure, right? So it created the symlink. That's awesome. All right, so that's kind of what this is. And if I refresh this, you're still going to see nothing, right? Because, I mean, we haven't really changed anything on that end, right? So one thing is we have to, now that we have that, right, what we want to do is we want to start configuring. Because remember, the way Apache worked before, it gave us a link, a var/www.html, where we had all of our stuff, right? Well, now we want our own website to be somewhere else, right? So we could choose www.html. We could do that, right? But we could also choose something else. It's totally up to us what we want to do, all right? So that's the first thing. So the first thing we want to do is, we kind of want that, to be set up properly. By the way, remember that to check to see if it's been installed properly, before we bring anything up, we can go /etc. And inside here, we can go into Nginx, right? Now you can see that it's here, and this is the area where all of our configuration files for Nginx are now. And notice that config.config.d and default d, these are folders that we can use. There's also the Nginx config, nginx.conf, these ones. And what we can do is if I do a cat nginx.conf, this is the configuration now file for Nginx. And look, it doesn't look like the other one did before, right? So it says, by default, right? By default, it says that the root is user share Nginx HTML. This is the root of where Nginx is going to look for its stuff. It's listening on port 80, right? Listening for any connection. That's what it is on port 80, right? Both those two listens. And this is the root folder for HTML. Okay, that's what it does. We also have an error 404 page by default, right? When we're running. And kind of that's how it works. Okay. Now, I'm just pointing this out to you because these are the basics of how all this works. Okay, so and this is what a configuration file looks like by default. So this is it, we create a server. Notice it looks like a little different than what we had in Apache. Instead of XML, it looks more like a JSON file. That's what it looks like, which is kind of cool, right? So very JavaScript-like, right? Which is good for us. It's really, really good. It says for more information, look at, it says include, etc., or etc., Nginx, conf.d, and it looks like any configuration file we have in there. That's what it does. And it's included inside of this file. All right, so it means automatically, when we use the include directive for Nginx, that's like saying, let's inject this particular configuration file, whatever configuration files we find, right here at this particular point. So we can configure it here, and then we have another configuration over here. We can do other includes if we want to. That's how typically how it works. There's also commented out, so hashtag comments everything out in the server configuration. That's how it works. And you can see that we've commented out a secure server, so secure HTTP, right? Because a lot of times we're moving towards a secure model, and they have we need an SSL certificate that we would set up and so on, which we don't have configured right now. But you could run HTTPS here as well as just plain old HTTP, which is what we're going to be running. Okay, so that's the configuration file. So again, let's keep this in mind. We're looking at the root USR share Nginx HTML. Okay, so this path right here. So USR share Nginx. Let's go there. So I go to cd/USR/Nginx. And so what are you seeing? Look, do we have an Nginx? So again, it looks like it says, oh, share. I'll be okay. Share Nginx, and there's HTML, and we have an index.html right here. So this is our index.html. Let's take a look at what's in there for Nginx. So cat index.html. There it is, right? Okay, so that is the site. It looks like it's the exact same thing. It says, note that you're, if you're running Apache, it's the exact same file as before, right? Then do this. If you're using, if you're running, Nginx, then do this. It's the exact same file basically in two different places now. Okay, so I'm just showing you this because that is what should be running. And if I try running it locally even, so let's say if I go here and go localhost, right, you can see even here, localhost and remote, I'm getting an error, right? So that's the first part. First part is, let's configure, this part so it doesn't work. And then what I want to do, right, is I want to configure it so that it does work. Okay, so that it does work. And I'm not going to change anything right now. All I want to do is I want to bring up Nginx. And the way to do that is to say service Nginx, we should probably use sudo for that. Nginx restart, which should how about service service Nginx restart. Yay. Okay, cool. Redirecting. It says to bin system control restart Nginx service. Okay, so again, we want to try and see that we're getting a local page first, which means we should get a page here. So those are the two things. So now we're at the same spot we were before, except we have nothing inside of that folder, right? Because right now it's just looking there, right? We have to kind of make a configuration file so we can run Nginx for ourselves. Okay, so that's the first part. First part is, hey, can we make Nginx work? Can I see this part? If I go to port 80, am I getting a site? And the answer is yes, I am. Okay. And once I have this, right, and I'm looking at a specific spot, I can point to looking at any spot I want. For example, if I want to repoint my server, and any change, one thing to note is this: any changes I make to my configuration in etc. So if I go back to etc, right, and if I go to Nginx, and if I go to nginx.conf in here, so if I go to let's change this. We'll say code nginx.conf, right, and I bring up VS Code, and you can see that this is the configuration file that we're using, right? And here is my include, and this is my default root, right? If I change this right here to so it looks at /var www html, like that whole thing, index.html, it's going to give us our other page. Let's take a look. So again, if I just change this line, right? So I go /var /www /html /index.html, right? If I did this and I press save, now by the way, notice it says retry as sudo, right? Because I'm accessing a system file, right? So it's going to it's going to need me to do this with a super user, right? Now it's still not going to do anything. It's not going to go anywhere else. Why? Because I've modified my server. I need to restart my server again. Every time I modify the server, this is the rule, we need to restart my server. So I go back here, and again, I'm just going to space up a couple times until I get to that command. There it is, sudo service nginx restart, and then it's done. Now, if I did everything right, then it's going to say something like along those lines, 404 not found, or. And now, one thing to note is this is great. It says Nginx 1.18.0. It tells me the version, and it tells me this little 404. This is exactly what's doing here. When I can't find this, if I made a mistake, which I probably did, then we'll see why it's giving me this issue. So let's go back to this place here and see, do I have a site there, or did I misspell it? Okay, so let's go back. So I'm going to go to, again, /var /www. And indeed, we have an HTML, and we have an index.html, so that is there. Right, so you can see that, right? So we say /var /www /html, right? That's all there. If I just did a pwd here, you can see that /var /www /html, that is all good, right? One thing to note is in my configuration script that I must put in a semicolon in there, right? If I was to take this out, let's say for example, I want to look here for anything.html. If I just did one of these, right, and I restarted the server, by the way, this is no good, right? So And I'll go back to the original and I'll show you what we did here. We notice that this is showing clearly that you can put HTML in here. But I'm just pointing this out so you can see how this works, right? So if I go back up and I just go and do a server reset, so a server reset, and if I go back and refresh, we're good to go, right? Because it's looking at a particular site and we're saying, hey, I just want to have, I want to look inside that site there, and inside the HTML site, I want to get any page that matches HTML. Basically, that's what I'm looking for, and I'm serving up my page. So now we're good. Now we've kind of done, you know, equivalencies on both sides, right? Where I have a page on the HTML side, and again, this is not using the latest stuff. This is just me accessing Nginx. So we've actually accomplished our goal a second time, right? Because now we have a web server that kind of works. We haven't really configured it much, but it works, and we're able to use the brand new, or the newer version. Instead of Apache, you can see that clearly, like, Nginx is working just as much. You know, we've disabled HTTP. The old HTTPD service is not gone. It's just turned off. Okay, so that's the thing that we've done. But now what we want to do is we want to install Node, right, on a Nginx server, right? That's a different thing. So remember, we have Node set up here. So I'm going to just close this off for now, okay? We're going to come back to this. But if I do something like a node minus version, just like we did before, you should have something like 14 dot whatever. Mine is 14.3. You might have 14.4 as an example. So hopefully you have something like this. Okay, so node, right? And we want to use something called my express generator to generate an express site that's going to, instead of do hello world, it's going to say hello express or something like that. But what I want to do is something called a reverse proxy for Node.js. Okay, that's what I want to do. I want to set up a reverse proxy. And the way to do that is inside of our configuration file that we just saw, right, in Nginx. Right? What I want to do is when, first of all, I mean, again, we need to go through here, and we can create a configuration file somewhere else, like we talked about before. Okay? So let's talk about how to do this. Okay? So first of all, I want to be able to listen for a proxy server, but I want to set up a local server first to test. So let's do it inside of our, by the way, this can be done anywhere. So it doesn't have to be in a specific spot. So here, if I look where I am, and I'm in var www.html. But I don't want to go there. That's my default, you know, site. I want to set up a site somewhere else. I'm going to go back to my home folder, and where I have my documents, cd documents, I'll be okay. I got nothing right now on this server, right? Let's make a new workspace for the website, and we'll call this Express. We'll call the web, the workspace, the Express workspace. So what we need to do to pull this off is I need you to download a new tool using npm. You're going to go npm install express-generator and then -g for global. So that's the command. So what is this magic that I'm talking about? Well, if I looked it up, if I went to the Express generator actually has its own little site, and it tells you how to use it. What you do is you can use npx or npm install -g for global Express generator, and then you can use the express command followed by a switch -e as an example. And -e will install kind of an engine, like a view engine. And we'll talk about what a view engine is later. For us, we don't really care. We just want a little Express Node.js website to work on the back end. And by the way, you can, this is long form -- view and whatever the view manager you want. I want my view engine to be -e for EJS because I'm an old school kind of guy. I like that over Pug, which used to be called Jade. And what it's going to do is it's going to scaffold all these folders. It's going to create all these folders and files for us. And this is a quick way of setting up a structure for a Node.js web application, right, by using something called the express generator. All right, so that's what I want to do first. I'm going to go here. I'm in the my VM, and I'm press enter. And oh yeah, I need to use. Sorry, one thing I need to do is use the sudo command, because again, if I don't do this, I need super user access for that. Let's do it. Good. So I've installed my express generator, as a global kind of installation. That's fantastic. And let's make use of the express generator. All right. So remember the usage. It's express, options, and the folder. Right. So I want to make a folder called express. Let's see if that can work. All right. So I'll say express -e. And I'll make the folder called, you can call this whatever you want, but I'm going to call it express. And then when I did that, right, it gives me some steering directions. But if I do an ls command, you can see now that I have a folder called express. You could have made this called Tom if you wanted, or something else, or website, right? But I made it I called it express, so we know it's our express server specifically that's running here. Locally, the way you run this is with another file, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download another piece of another package. So I'm going to go to Npm Install nodemon -g. And nodemon, if you want to look what that is, nodemon. I know you're saying, oh my God, I'm installing all this stuff and I don't understand anything. Don't worry. I'm just explaining. I'm just demonstrating how to use Nginx as a server. So what nodemon is, it automatically reloads our express server when we make changes. That's what nodemon does. There's other ones too, PS. And a bunch of other ones that can do the same thing. Forever, there's a bunch of modules that'll do the same thing. But that's what nodemon does. Nodemon automatically reloads the server. So if we change our server locally, and then we don't have to restart the server here manually. All right, so let's install this. So again, we need to use the sudo command to do this properly. And it installs nodemon. Nodemon is just like a starter, if you will, or a watch application, a watcher, right, that manages our web server. We can start it, okay? And if I do an ls, you can see that we're still in express. If I go cd express, right, you can see now that I have the packages that were installed, but I need to install the packages from Node, and the way to do that is perform an npm install. And again, we want to do we don't need to do sudo here because we're just doing installing local packages. All right, so that's what we're doing. So this is going to download and install all the packages, and it's going to create for me a node modules folder. So if I do ls-al, you can see now that I have a node modules folder, and it has a lot of stuff inside of it, like tons and tons. So if I do ls node modules, node _ modules, I'll be okay. You see there's like a ton of other folders that are installed, right? That's what the express generator does for me. I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. Whew. Hopefully this so far is clear as mud. Okay. And then to run it, right? To run it, I just need to just type the keywords nodemon and then press enter. And if you did this properly, you should see something that looks like this. Now, locally, this is running on port 3000 as opposed to port 80. So here, if I go to hello world and press refresh, I'm not going to notice anything right now on the Windows machine side. All right. Here locally, though, if I go to localhost and I type in localhost :3000 and press enter, you should see something that looks like this, Express. Because now I'm running Node.js on the back end, right, and Express middleware. I don't have any MongoDB. I don't have Angular yet. I mean, this is all another process that I could run. But you can see here that I've got my Express middleware functioning nicely. Okay, so this is good. We're in a good spot right now because we're able to run this thing. And by the way, this has nothing to do. This localhost 3000 has nothing to do at all with our web server. This little thing is actually running independently of our web server here. That's one thing to note too. But I want to use Node.js, right, so that when I get a request, if I get a request here for 3000, like this, right, then I should be able to tunnel through, right, from the outside into our little website inside here, wherever it is, right? We're running the latest and greatest technologies, Node.js and Express. That's what I want to be able to do. But right now, it's not accepting port 3000 in any way. It doesn't accept that port. So in order for me to do that, right, in order for me to do this, I need to configure my web server. And the configuration file, remember, is inside the etc folder. So let's stop this little Express server. All these servers. I got this server, that server. So I'm going to go into /etc/nginx. And inside of my conf.d, this folder right here, right, we don't have a configuration file, if I'm not wrong. So if I go cd conf.d and I do an ls, there's nothing in there. All right. So I can make my own configuration file. If I go back up, by the way, cd space, and if I go to default.d and I do an ls, again, in default or in conf.d, there's nothing. And remember that if we go out to the main root here, and if I look at cat nginx, my configuration file, you can see that it's clearly looking at anything that's inside the conf.d folder. It's going to include right here. Okay. Now, order matters. Order matters. So remember, what I want to do is I want to include anything in the conf.d folder, right? But it's going to do this as well. It's going to still listen to 80 and all this kind of stuff. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We can definitely have a single server and put it here, right here, right? We can create a server name and all that stuff, like an actual server name, or leave it the way it is. And instead of listening into root, which is what's happening right now, we can remove this line, right? So let's do a, just to make it quick is what I'm doing this for. So code. So I want to do this, code nginx conf. There we go. Remember that we have to save, when we save here, we're going to have to save a super user, right? And if I scroll down, and ignoring all the other configurations, here in root, if I just comment that out, so I'm not looking at root anymore, I'm not looking at this anymore, right? When I reboot my server. Oh, by the way, notice that a couple things happen here. Root here, I have a configuration file here, order matters, right? Then I load another configuration file here inside default.d. So load default configuration files for the default server block here, right? Load modular configuration files for the directory here if I want to add additional modules, right? So really where I want to put it is right here. I could simply leave our root configuration alone if I wanted a backup or something. But here is where I want to look in this comp folder. Again, I can call this whatever I want, right? It's really up to me. So we're going to put this inside of our default configuration file for our default server block, like it says. A server block is something that looks like this. So I'm going to save this. It's going to ask me to save as sudo. And now we haven't restarted yet. I'm just going to close off this. And I'm going to go into my default D. And I want to make a new file, which we're going to have our default server. We're going to call it, we can call it whatever we want. So I'm going to call it like server.conf. And again, make sure you use sudo. And then let's try using sudo code server.conf so it doesn't ask us for it's not recommended, yeah, sure, okay, let's just not do that then. It's not recommended code. Yeah, that's fine. So if we go in here, you can see that now we have nothing in there, and let's start adding some additional things. So I want to add my own server block, so it's called server, right? And curly braces, the order doesn't matter. White space doesn't really matter here. I want to listen, as an example, on a particular port. So I'm listening on 80 again. I can specify a server name. So let's say my server name I can specify. And usually what I want to do it is in reverse domain order. So something like if I had a name that I wanted to use for myself, let's say ca.centennial, right, as an example, I can listen for that name. But I'm not going to do that. Let's just leave the server name out. We actually don't even have to have a server name in here, right, because we already have one above. But the main thing is location. So I'm going to listen for the / location. So location / means when I go to my website here and I just put in / by itself, this, right? It should take me to my default page. So when I go to my / location, / means the root, right? So what I want to do is in this code block right here, I said for the default location, what do I want to do? I can set up a couple of headers. I can set up a couple of headers, but what I really want to do is do a proxy pass. So I want to say something like proxy pass, right? HTTP : / and then my localhost, and then followed by the port. So I'm looking at, I'm creating a reverse proxy, that's what this is, right? Which basically is saying, hey, whenever I go to /, whenever someone comes to my website with /, and they're coming at me with localhost, whatever my local address is, and they're coming at me with port 3000, right? I want to redirect back to port 80. That's what this is going to do. I'm doing a reverse lookup, a reverse, proxy is what I'm setting up here. That's what it's called. Okay. And to be safe, typically what we want to do is we want to set up additional headers, right? Because our web server looks for some default headers, and one of them is the remote address, right? And the other one is for HTTP. So we're going to say proxy _ set header. This is just a configuration file that you can find in the Nginx documentation. But we're running out of time. I want to make sure this works. Forwarded for $remote address. Any $, remember that it's like a variable. And I also want to set header to host HTTP _ host. Okay, so these are the configurations that we're going to make. We're going to save these as super user do. Saved. Okay, so that's the pieces that we want in here, right? And remember that this is in the correct order. So again, server, we're going to listen. We could put a server name in there, but we've decided not to. But remember, by default, if you go here and if I do a cat server.conf now, you can see that that information is there. And if I do a cat nginx.conf, you can see that what's happening is at some point right here, right after our listing on regular ports, and we've subbed out this HTML site, right? It's going to look to this configuration file after it does basic configuration and server setup. It's going to look here for our configuration, which when we're telling it that when we get a local request for localhost 3000, right, then I want to redirect it back to 80, okay, which is the regular port. Or actually, it's the other way around. When I'm listening to port 80, and if I'm getting in any localhost regular IP address, I want to proxy it over to localhost 3000. Okay. By the way, you can replace localhost with 127.0.0.1, which you may want to try and do. Okay, so now let's restart the web server. Remember, that's a thing we have to do. We can't just run this thing and hope. So we're going to do a sudo system control restart. We can do it this way or using service restart nginx. And if we did everything properly and if it worked, control process exited with error code, system status, nginx service, and journal ctx xc for details. Okay, so what this means is our server, we have an error potentially in our files somewhere. All right, so let's take a look. So semicolons are all there. We're listening on port 80. And by the way, this is super important because if we don't do things here correctly, right? And I'm just making sure that I've got semicolons for everything and stuff. If we don't do things correctly, then what ends up happening is that the things don't work. Right. So this is the first thing we check. We check this, and it could be that this is okay, but when we took out that little line in our configuration file, when we subbed out that little line, that could be the issue. So I may have to go back and put it back in. We'll see that in a second. So again, first things first. We're just trying to do our configuration change. Okay, so that's first thing. So let's do it the other way around. Remember when we started restarted Nginx, we can do service Nginx restart. Okay, so let's try that and see. That gives us more details actually. So if I do clear and if I do sudo service Nginx restart, it says redirecting, and it says, but Nginx service failed because the control process exited with an error code. So we have an error in our process that's causing that to have an issue, right? And the other thing we can do is we can also go look at system control status for Nginx, right? That we can do. And it tells us that if there's going to be an issue. So it says failed, right? That's what it says, failed. And it usually gives us an error code right here. It says failed with result of exit code. And a lot of times it'll tell us where it failed, right? So it says directive not allowed here. Right here it says server directive is not allowed here in etc. Nginx default d server.conf, right? So that's interesting that it's done that because I mean, again, documentation says we're good to go, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just one site that's telling us, you know, kind of how to configure our Nginx server, and that's definitely where it is. So again, it's in our code block that we're making a reverse server, right? I can point to it wherever I want, okay? If I go back, let's go back and fix that. But this is definitely an issue. This is not good, right? If we get this it's actually telling us the problem. That doesn't like this server, you know, the server block that's inside of a server block. It doesn't like that at all, right? So a couple of ways we can fix this is we can comment it out and test it. So we can say, okay, well, I want this instead of what I have over there. So I can copy all this stuff here. And let's go back to, before we start the service, so clear. And we'll do a code nginx.conf. So we're just opening it up at in the same editor, side by side, right? So this is kind of like, here we have our configuration, here we have this. And what I want to do, just to not kill all this good work we've done here, I want to put in here, so we'll sub this out, so we won't even look inside this folder anymore, right? But instead, what I want to do is take the same information, this location right here, which is what we really want, copy it, and go and put it right in here, because this is where it would be injected anyway, right? So that's probably what I did wrong. But anyways, so this is what I want. I want this location to be injected right here. I don't care about root. I don't care about the server name. I like that it's listing on port 80, but this location is important. So let's retry sudo. Nice. Okay. And let's try running that service again. So I'm going to go back here and we're going to restart the service. So sudo service Nginx restart. And now we're good. Now it looks like it's okay, right? So let's see what we get now. And now it says this is good. This is really good. It says the page you're looking for is temporarily unavailable. Please try again, right? Because I'm trying to look at 80 as an example. But there is nothing at 80 anymore. There's no default website, right? What if I looked at 3000? Can I tunnel through and get to a page that looks like that. Right now it says something is trigger your website. This is the default error page for Nginx, distributed by Fedora, user, share, Nginx, HTML, 5. It's a server error that I'm getting. Oh yeah, well, because we don't have our server running. That's why we have this error. So let's stop this funky thing. And let's go back to that place in our website, because our server's not even running right now. So, and I'm trying to do this to give you a sense of how complex it can be to manage a server on your own. So here we are in Express. I'm going to run nodemon. Right? Remember nodemon? I didn't do that. I don't have this up right now. So nodemon running on port 3000. What if I just press refresh? Right? Does that solve the problem? Or what if I press 3000? Right? Does that give me a connection? So that's what I'm looking at. 192.168.291.3000. Okay, and that doesn't seem to be working, but I'm getting something, which means this is great. I'm getting some kind of response, right? Localhost may not be happy with localhost. Let's put in our actual external IP address. So we'll put in 192.168.2.91. When we go to 291, we want to, from there, I want to get to, back to port 80. So save, retry as sudo. We made a configuration change, which means I have to relaunch my changes, right? There it is. And let's just put nodemon in there again. So the change went through because we didn't have an error like we had before. All I've done is rename. We put in a different address in here instead of before. And if I refresh now, let's see if I can just go into my regular website. Still getting this error. I'm happy with the errors. The errors mean that we're getting a response from Nginx. We're not getting the response I want. That's bad. But we're getting a response, and this is a good thing. Always like responses better than no response. Okay? Or some weird can't find or not found kind of thing. And let's check locally still. Do we still have the ability for us to see locally? Because, I mean, if you don't work locally, then that's another thing we want to always check. Because I'm pretty sure locally we're not going to have a problem running localhost 3000. You can see that here we're getting a response from our nodemon saying, hey, we're accessing these style sheets, right? So we're pretty good, right? So localhost 3000. If I just put localhost, though, just by itself, localhost, and press enter, you can see we get this default page again. There's nothing in that site. There's nothing that's looking in a specific spot, right? Because we don't have a page that we're looking at right now. Okay. In that site, right? But localhost 3000, yeah, that totally works. This is where we want to go. So this is a way to go. So again, that didn't work. Let's try 127.0.0.1. That is the explicit IP address without changing the LMS file, right? So that's the the kind of the 127.0.0.1 is like saying localhost. Okay, that's what it is. So again, retry. And I'm gonna have to actually look at my other configuration because I'm running out of time, and I want to be able to launch this and make it work for you guys, so you know how to do it. All right, so now let's kick off the server again. I'm just gonna, just for us, for our purposes, I'm just gonna launch another terminal because what I want to do is, let's try that again. I want to launch another terminal so I can have two, so I don't kill the server. The server can keep running, but I can have another bash over here, and again, it remembers all the kind of stuff that I did in terms of our stuff, so I can go back and do the same thing. So I'm going to say sudo service Nginx restart. So if everything goes well, we're good to go, right? 127, and then if I refresh, we can see nothing. And what about 3000? Do I get a response? And I haven't opened port 3000. That's another thing, which is why it's bouncing. I'm happy it's bouncing, to be honest. But I'm not expecting this response. I'm expecting something else. So let's, without further ado, I'm just going to shut down this version of my VM, and I'm going to go back to my other version just to take a look at my configuration, because I want to show you what it really looks like. Okay. So I'm just going to suspend, and the way to suspend, of course, Not always the smart thing to do, but I don't like it. But you can just save machine state and press OK. And this is only because I'm running out of time, guys. Otherwise, I would do some troubleshooting and get it done. But I wanted you to get a sense. This is the idea here behind all this. The sense of, hey, it's really easy to set up an Apache server. It's built in out of the box. Nginx, it's not difficult, believe it or not. It's just a matter of knowing what to do. And there are some configuration changes that you have to make. But once you make them, your little Linux server is really useful, right? You can run, you know, kind of a little server locally, and to really emulate what it's like to run remotely. And once you have those configuration files in place, you literally can transfer the files exactly as is to an online server, like for example on DigitalOcean. By the way, I had planned, if things went well, to show you what it looks like on DigitalOcean. Maybe we'll do that next week, just to show you, just to wrap this up. We'll see how it goes. All right, so here I'm just going to run my other server, which has a configuration in place. And I'll show you what I've done there, and I'm probably forgetting something. That's why. It's always that way. There's a million things to look at and different resources. But with a little bit more research, and this is where I want to get you guys into this headspace, with a little bit more research, you know, and there's a lot of information here online, you can pretty much configure any service on Linux that's reasonable, FTP, SSH, HTTPD, some kind of Mongodb from the Mongo database server, you know, Nginx with Node.js, an Express server, and even Angular on the front end to make a really cool little experience for you, which kind of gives you this whole, you know, the whole ecosystem, gives you a sense of how it really works when you're a web developer. So part of being a good web developer is understanding how to do all this stuff from scratch, right, and not just modifying files that exist. Great thing is if you use GoDaddy or if you use Microsoft Azure as a place to host your stuff, or Amazon Web Services or Google Platform, there's a lot of steering instructions on how to make everything work. Okay, so here I am with my old server, or the one that I had already configured. And let's run my terminal. Let's do ifconfig to see what my ifconfig, Tom, to see what my IP address is. Is it the same? No. 192.168.260. Let's see what I get here when I do that. So 192.168.2.60. By default, I get this forbidden page. This is good. Actually, this is the page I was hoping to get, forbidden, when I'm not running a server. And then if I go to documents, I'm going to show you the end results, documents. And if I go to workspace 2, or where's workspace? I don't know if it's workspace 2 or 3. Maybe workspace 2? Nope. There's my Express website, and if I just type in nodemon, then it'll run on port 3000. And if I refresh, no problem. But if I go to port 3000, then you can see I got Express, and it goes the tunnels right through. And this is what I wanted to show you, because what it's doing is it's literally forwarding my address. Now again, I'm not doing any firewall configuration changes from outside to inside. For example, I could say that from an outside server, instead of using our configuration, for this particular IP address incoming, right, as an example, 192.168.2.60, it's going to forward internally, port forwarding. We're going to forward to this particular place, 127.0.0.1, and then port 3000, and then it would just run the server just like this, right? So on the outside, it looks like it's just the regular website. On the inside, it's forwarding without using reverse proxy through Nginx. So let me just show you what that looks like. So if I go to /etc/Nginx, and if I look at the configuration file, let's just do a code nginx.config. That should give us the stuff that I was looking for, which I missed, chances are. And yes, server name is this. And what did I do? Where am I looking? And I put it here. Okay. So yeah, let's take a look at this. So that's it. It's an Nginx conf. I should have put it there, but I did. That's fine. So we'll go there. And then we'll do an edit, our code default. I just call it default in this case. Let's see what that looks like. That's what I would have done. Wait a minute. How is this running? Did I make a change somewhere else? Oh yeah, okay. So it's also included in etc nginx sites available.conf. Okay, so I made another configuration file. That's not a big deal. Okay, so let's look there. Sites available. Oh, I gotta go up one step. There's reverse proxy. So code, call it reverse proxy to remind myself what it was, of course, but I didn't do it. Yeah, that's what I put in. Look, it's exactly the same thing. So I'm listening for 192.168.260, and it's bouncing to port 80, right, as an example, right? So this is how it would work. And so you can see that, and notice like it totally worked here. Server was good here. Somehow it worked for me here, but it didn't work for me before. I'm listening on port 80 as an example. And this is okay. By the way, if I did it another way, let's say, for example, I'm not listening on port 3000, right? I'm not listening on port. So when I go to port 80, I'm going to port 3000 is what this is supposed to do, right? As an example. You know, if I change this to 127.0.0.1, different things would happen. But this is basically what we're doing. We'll make a kind of a proxy pass is what you use to create a reverse proxy so it points to the right side. Okay, it's exactly what it is. There's just a configuration change I had to make somewhere. But more or less, if you do your research and if you're interested in doing this kind of stuff, which I think is really interesting for you guys to know how to do, then you'll be able to do what I just did. Whew. Questions? And any, how about this question? Would you do it? Would you try and do it on your own? Run a web server? Do you think it's worth it to do your own administration? What are your thoughts? And I'm looking for some comments on the chat now, guys, if possible. And not just a yes, no, check mark thing. More like, what do you think? Do you think this is something that you want to do? You want to configure your little web server. I know for the most part that most people that I've talked to from a web development perspective, they're like, yeah, no, I got no interest in managing my own web server. You have a server administrator for that, and I agree, because when you go to an interview, they're going to say, we want you to be a full stack developer. This is what they say, full stack developer. We want you to know how to manage a Linux server. We want you to know how to manage a database. We want you to know how to manage a web server. We want you to manage Express, run things with Node, understand how to build a front end like Angular or React. Guys, you know how many jobs that is? Right there, the things that I probably mentioned like 5 or 6 different jobs for different people. So a lot of times that they ask you in an interview is something that's completely unrealistic, right? But the idea is that you have a sense of what to do. There's a lot of back-end work that you have to do to make sure that you configure a server like Nginx or Apache or whatever. We haven't even gone to the Apache configuration, which is very similar to what we've seen here. In fact, maybe a little easier. Okay. Any questions for me? All right, so just a piece of admin before we go. Remember that your assignment 2 is due this week. And also, I got some emails from people that had problems accessing their previous quiz. I will make it available again today. For those people who had problems accessing, I'll make it available. If you've already done your 2 tries, it won't do anything. It won't allow you to make another 3rd try or something like that. But I will make it available later on today. And then remember that tomorrow night by midnight is when your assignment 2 is due. Next week, we start a new module. And to get prepared for the new module we're going to start next week, again, one thing you want to try and do on your server, on your little Fedora installation, or if you're going to use Ubuntu or something else, type in Python and press enter. And sometimes it's not Python, but it's rather Python 3. Okay, so Python 3 or Python should lead you to the same location. Python's probably just aliased, right? That's what it is. So it takes you to Python 3. And Python is really interesting, the way it works, in that you can definitely print something like hello right here in the editor, right? So I can say hello, right? Which is really, you can do a lot of little commands here, right here in Python. Things like, what is, 5 times 5, kind of thing. You can do little commands, it acts like a calculator, and it executes right here in your code. So we're going to learn how to do all this kind of stuff starting off next week. We're going to probably start with simple things like, variables, control flow, all that kind of stuff that you normally are used to. And we're going to get you all up to speed with Python starting next week. You'll also get assignment 3 very shortly, as in the next assignment's all about Python. Okay. So any questions around this stuff? Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate you watching. I'm going to stop recording now. And what I'd like to say is enjoy the weekend. Focus on the work that you have to do for me for assignment 2. Please, assignment 1 almost completely marked. I haven't released it all for everybody, but for the most part, it's not terrible. You've got some really good submissions and some people that I still can't hear. Guys, if you can't hear you, that's where I want to depend on your PowerPoint. I'm going to give you part marks. And if you didn't do it live, I have some people that, for whatever reason, did their PowerPoint and then they looked at their PowerPoint and they didn't do the live work inside of your VM. That's not what I was asking for you to do. So please, that's not what I'm asking at all for assignment 1. Nor for assignment 2. I want you to be live and actually see you work within your VM. PowerPoint's in there as a backup for me to look at. You can use it as a backdrop, but you need to still do your work live inside your terminal. All right? So that's what I was looking for. Anyways, again, don't worry. There's always part marks. I'm not going to take away too many marks for that. If you're still talking to your PowerPoint and it's your work, you're going to lose like 10 marks as opposed to lose all the marks. Okay? So it's nothing crazy. And remember, this is only one assignment out of a bunch. Okay. Otherwise, guys, I'll stick around for any kind of questions you may have. For people that can stick around, but if you can't stick around, totally understand. So I'll stop recording now and I'll wait for questions.